eternal, yet ever new. His advent and His proximity, His mystical leelas and His songs, every mischief and miracle a message memorable. Every pain and travail a precept enacted. As the bud blossomed to reveal 1,000 petals, it can only be said that the fragrance of the first few years was unique.
We are gathered here for what is the primary spiritual step. When you talk of the Navavida Bhakti, the first and foremost of that is Shravanam, or listening. There are 8 more parts after that, but the first and foremost is Shravanam. And that's what all of us are here for, including both of us. Shravanam itself can be told to be of 3 types. First is when you listen without your own volition. Somebody might be talking about it and you might just come to hear about it. There is no active listening in that, you just happen to hear about it. That also is Shravanam. The second type of Shravanam, or what could be called the second stage of Shravanam, is when you choose to listen about the stories of the Lord. Like all of us, we have decided that this time we want to give it to the listening of the stories of the Lord, where we have made a conscious choice. We have decided to dedicate a certain amount of our time for this purpose. That is the second type of Shravanam. But the third type, which is the most important, is when after listening, you go through a process which Swami would call Shravanam, Mananam and Nididhyasanam, where you just don't stop with listening, but you listen, you reflect. Whatever you've heard, you roll it over your mind again and again and go through a process of concentrated, slow absorption. The story goes that once Arjuna and Krishna are going for a long walk by a river bank, and Arjuna asks Krishna, says, Krishna, how do you classify your devotees? How many types of devotees do you have, and which type of devotee is dear to you? So Krishna tells Arjuna, come, let me explain. And he walks up to the river and puts his hand into the water and picks out a pebble. And he gives it to Arjuna and says, Arjuna, break up this pebble. So Arjuna breaks the pebble, and then Arjuna is perplexed. He says, how is this an explanation for devotion? So then Krishna says that this pebble has been in the water for years together, but do you see any wetness inside the pebble? And Arjuna says, no, there isn't any. Then Krishna says, this is one type of devotee who is constantly in the presence of the Lord, who is constantly listening to the stories of the Lord, but nothing percolates inside. He's as he is, or she is as she is inside. That is one type. Then Krishna bends down, takes his pitambar and dips it into the water, and he pulls it out and asks Arjuna, look at this pitambar. How is it? Then Arjuna says, it was dry before, it is wet now. Then Krishna says, this is the second type of devotee who is dry as long as he is not in contact with the Lord. But when he is in contact with the Lord, he soaks. He absorbs so much of the Lord. But just take him away from the Lord, it just takes a matter of few minutes before he is dry and back to his old self. And he says, this is the second type of devotee. And then Krishna looks at Arjuna, waves his hand, and materializes a small sugar candy. And without much ado, he just drops it into the water. And he says, this is the third type of devotee who, when in contact with the Lord, not only does he get wet, not only does he get drenched, but he loses himself in that glory of the Lord. With constant reflection, Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam, he loses his individuality. He becomes one with the glory of the Lord. He or she is no more an individual entity. And this is the third type of Shravanam, which all of us pray to Swami that we all are able to do that. Not merely come, sit here, listen, or read books, but to read, know, and to be lost in that glory.
If we dive deep into any ocean, we come across sand which is so very fine that it becomes impossible to pick up one grain of sand. But each single grain of sand that we find at the bottom of the ocean was once upon a time a big boulder or a big rock. So while Lord Krishna explains the three kinds of devotees, the best being like the sugar, and apparently the worst being like a rock, the beauty of the Lord's grace and the Lord's love, water, is such that even the largest and hardest of rocks get worn and broken down to become fine sand at the bottom of the ocean. That is the power of the story of the Lord. We completed Swami's sojourn at Kamalapuram, and we concluded how Swami had told his father that you go ahead, once I complete everything, I'll return back to Puttaparthi. He returned to Puttaparthi, but in Puttaparthi there was no elementary school, there was no middle school. One could study only up to 5th grade or 5th standard in Puttaparthi, and therefore Swami had to enroll in the elementary school, the board elementary school at BUKKAPATNAM, which is about 5 kilometers away from Puttaparthi. And actually this is the TC, the transfer certificate that Swami was given from the Kamalapuram school, and he was, as it is written in the line over here, he has been qualified for promotion. And he moved over to Samiti Elementary School in BUKKAPATNAM. Swami is an ideal in everything. He was the ideal student too. Every school where he has studied is today a magnificent place because Swami himself went and rebuilt it. This was the first stage. Today if you go to BUKKAPATNAM, you will not be able to identify the school only. It is so magnificent because that is how Swami always repays his debt when he has come in the avataric body. In fact, for one of the functions, Swami sent Professor Kasturi himself to go and unveil a portrait of Bhagwan in this very school. Today, if we have to go to this school, we travel 4 kilometers by a fantastic road that has been laid out because that road is a highway. But those days there was no road. And Swami had to walk right across from Puttaparthi to BUKKAPATNAM, along the Chitravati, across the BUKKAPATNAM tank. You know, his fame had already preceded him. By the time he came to BUKKAPATNAM, everybody knew that this boy is a special boy, and there was jealousy. And a lot of Swami's classmates who used to study in the BUKKAPATNAM school, they were not the same as those who were in Puttaparthi. There were some newcomers, and these newcomers used to try and bully Swami. They would throw thorn balls at his hair, and Swami was beginning to get his bushy hair in those days, and so those thorn balls would get stuck in his hair. They would drag him in the water, his clothes would get soiled. But Swami would not mind that. Nothing could disturb his composure. For us, even a little crackling of the mic and it completely puts us off. But nothing could touch Swami's composure. He was an embodiment of peace, an embodiment of love, and he would carry his breakfast from home. His mother would be making this breakfast. Again, it was the same ragi ball. And there were no tiffin carriers, metal tiffin carriers. Later on, we had compartmentalized carriers where there is curry in one, rice in the other, chapati in the other. You can neatly segregate so that it doesn't get mixed up. Those days, Swami had a piece of white cloth in which the ragi ball would be kept and bundled. And that bundle would be tied to a stick and Swami would carry. That was his meal. And Swami would say that this meal, by the time he goes to school and spends 3 hours there, this ragi ball hardens And so Swami would go to a nearby stream and dip that cloth in that stream. After 5 minutes, it becomes soft. He would open it and he would consume it.
Oftentimes when we talk of these years of Swami and even the years which Swami spent later, we would like to use a word to describe Swami, and the word is sacrifice. But when you talk of somebody like Swami, when you talk of somebody as detached as Swami, the word sacrifice is a complete misnomer and it has no place in the description of the Lord. Because you sacrifice when you are attached. You sacrifice when you like something more than the other. Sacrifice does not describe a person who is in a state of complete bliss by himself, who does not need something to make him happy, who does not need comfort from outside. Because one of the spiritual masters, he says, when you become a yogi who is detached, who does not have likes and dislikes, you become a mahabhogi. Because when you become a yogi, you go to a state where you enjoy everything. I enjoy this also, I enjoy that also. Today you give me a bed, I enjoy that. Tomorrow you ask me to sleep on the floor, I enjoy that. So a yogi becomes a mahabhogi. So there is no question of sacrifice when you talk of Swami. And that was the lesson which Swami taught through all these things, little things which we say that, oh God, Swami suffered so much. Oh God, Swami went through so many travails. But what Swami was telling is, happiness never comes from outside. Happiness, peace and comfort always comes from within. And that's what Swami showed in that tender age. And when you live a life of happiness which comes from within, idealism becomes spontaneous. And that's what happened with Swami. Because everywhere he was the most ideal person. When he went to Kamalapuram, he was the ideal student. At home, he was the ideal grandson. To his parents, he was the ideal son. So when he went to BUKKAPATNAM, very effortlessly, he became the best student in the class. Now that put Swami in a difficult predicament. Because here was the teachers. The teachers were very fond of him because he was very obedient. He was doing his work. He was intelligent. He was very talented. Oftentimes, we would have seen this in our schools and classes as well. If there is one student who is exemplary, the teacher tries to use the exemplary student to correct those who are, not very ideal. And that's what happened with Swami's case. One of Swami's teachers, by name Subarnachar, he decided that a little bit of disciplining is required in the class because the students were coming at all kinds of times. Because, the situation was quite typical as we described Swami's life. All these children who came to Swami's school, they were all working in their houses. Some of them would be going to their fields. Some of them will be tending to cattle. Some of them will be doing little household chores. So the teacher decided that some discipline has to be set in. All these students have to come in time. So Swami was called, little Satyam was called, and Subarnachar told him that, you know what, Satyam, you have to bring discipline to this class. So you stand outside, and every student who comes late to the class, you have to give him a tight slap. How should you slap them? You should hold their nose and give them a tight slap. Okay, this was the task given to Swami. The funny thing was, those days, it's a village school, so a lot of these children had failed multiple times. So many of his classmates, Swami's classmates, were way elder to Swami. That is not the reason why Swami did not want to slap. Anyway, Swami did not want to hurt anybody. So Swami was standing there, he cannot disobey the teacher. So as the students would come, Swami would catch their nose as gentle can be and pat them even more gently. So this teacher got infuriated. What are you trying to say? Are you trying to appreciate their indiscipline? I'm asking you to correct them. So telling Swami that you're not doing it the right way, he would come and slap Swami tightly and say, I want you to slap like this. So for no mistake of his, Swami would get beaten. And on another occasion, when Subarnachar was not impressed by this compassion of little Satyam, he said, you need a sound whacking. So he tells you, put out your hand, and brings a cane menacingly, and he says, let me whack your hand. And when Swami puts out his hand, how lucky this Subarnachar, Swami's teacher, was, because he had the vision of Shirdi Baba in the palm that Swami put out. And for moments he was lost. He didn't know what he was seeing, because Shirdi Baba was not a very famous personality then, but he knew that what he was witnessing was not a normal human experience.
Swami could never punish anybody. Swami never punishes anybody. In fact, I remember one of our senior brothers narrated this episode where Swami was apparently giving him the cold treatment. And not him, to one student. He was giving the cold treatment, and the cold treatment is worse than the hot treatment actually. In the hot treatment, Swami comes and scolds you, tells you have no brain, gets angry, big eyes, hey, and that sends shivers down your spine, and you'll think this is the worst thing possibly that's happening. But worse than that is when Swami looks through you as if you don't exist. He looks and smiles at the person behind you, looks beside you, but doesn't look at you. When he comes near you, he turns away. And in student terms, we used to call it as Bala Sai Darshan. When you can see only Sai's Bal, which is hair, because he turns away from you. So this student was undergoing the cold treatment, and he wrote a letter to Swami. He said, Swami, do whatever you want, but please don't torture me like this. And that day, Swami happened to receive his letter. After 10 minutes, Swami came straight to him. And we must, treasure what Swami told him. Swami said, what are you writing in the letter? And Swami pointed out to that word, torture. Do you know what is the meaning of torture? Torture is when you trouble somebody and derive joy out of troubling that person. Do you know when you're feeling sad, how much more sad I am? You have no idea what I undergo when you're in pain. Don't make this mistake of thinking that I'm torturing you. When the hand picks up a needle and pricks the finger to remove a thorn, it doesn't want to torture the finger. It wants to remove the thorn. And in the same way, when a thorn pricks the finger, when the hand goes and pulls out the thorn, it doesn't pull out the thorn because I want to do seva. It pulls out the thorn because I have to pull out the thorn, that's it. That is what I am for. The hand does not complain that only the mouth is getting fed. It knows the mouth is fed, all of us receive nutrition. And that is what oneness is. That's why Swami says the proper study of mankind is man. Study your own body how it is. That is how mankind is. And that is how Swami did seva. He never felt I'm doing seva. He did what the hand does for the leg. And when he pricked the finger, it is not to harm, but to help. And one such episode took place in the class as well. One of Swami's favorite teachers, a Muslim teacher by name Mahbub Khan. Mahbub Khan would come even before the bell rings and wait outside the class, because the more time I get to see Swami, the better. And he would come waiting, and one day when he came, he saw a scene that shocked him. The scene was that Satyam, his favorite student, was standing on a bench, and the teacher apparently had punished him. So he wondered what is it, but anyway he cannot intrude into other teachers' business, so he waited. The bell goes, and this teacher is just not vacating his seat. And Mahbub Khan felt that now it is my right to vacate him, because it is my class now. And he walked in and he told the teacher, I think, sir, it is time to leave because my class is starting. He says, yes, I want to leave. Then please leave. I am unable to leave. Why? The chair is not allowing me to leave. Immediately Mahbub Khan understood. He said, you are making Satyam stand, and that is why you are not able to get up. You make Satyam sit down, the chair will release you. Now this was a desperate man. He didn't know anything. He would have tried anything. If he had told, remove your tongue and touch your nose, he would have tried that also, because he was stuck to the chair. So he told Satyam, sit down. The moment Satyam sat down, the chair left him and he rose up. There too is such a beautiful message. The descent of God is for the ascent of man. God descends to human levels so that man can ascend to divine levels. And it would be wrong to think that Swami punished the teacher. In fact, in a later discourse, Swami would say, I had only love for the teacher. I was just preparing the world to receive my reality.
Many years ago, one of my classmates who happens to be a member of the Hyderabad youth group, he was sharing this particular interaction they had with Swami. Swami had promised them that he would give them an interview on one particular day. And it so happened that Swami did not give them an interview on that day. So you know what happens to our minds when you get a promise from Swami and it is not fulfilled? So these boys are voicing out their concerns and for voicing out their disappointment. They were talking to each other. He said, what is this? Swami is doing like this. It's very bad of Swami. He promised that he would call us and he didn't call us. He teaches us Satya Dharma and he does not follow Satya. All these kind of talks. They were talking within themselves in their rooms and in their sheds. Needless to say, during the trip, Swami did call them for an interview. And Swami spoke to all of them and the regular talk was going on. In the middle of that interview, Swami looked at them and he said, boys, give me one promise. And they were all very eager. What is this Swami wants from them? And then Swami told them, whatever happens in your life, whatever situations you are forced to go through, try your best not to get angry with Swami and spill words. Try your best not to be angry and tell wrong things about Swami. And Swami was pleading with them, never do that, because doing that is very, very harmful for you. I cannot do anything if that harm comes to you after you do this. And so Swami was pleading with them, please don't do this, because that's the law of nature. Because here is somebody who is absolutely pure. Here is somebody who has nothing called selfishness in him. So if you look at him and you say that, he did this harm to me and this is so bad of him to do this, the nature will react to you pointing a finger at purity. So Swami was not punishing that teacher, but this was the law of nature. Swami did go to that school. Swami did go to Puttaparthi school, Kamalapuram school. Now we are at BUKKAPATNAM. But it is absolutely clear that he did not need a school. The school needed him in more ways than one, because being an ideal student, he was teaching the students much more than what the teachers could teach them. But it is for sure that he did not need the school. So what was Swami doing when he was in the school? Many times, Swami would start from home but would not go to the school. Because Swami would very absent-mindedly, apparently, walk into one of these temples like this one. This is a Chaudamma temple, which is, even to this day, it is there if you go to BUKKAPATNAM. Swami would go to some silent shrines like this, sit there, either sit contemplatively, or Swami would sit and write poems in padyams. Because as we explained, Swami had already started the Pandhari Bhajan group. After coming back to BUKKAPATNAM, he's revived that Pandhari Bhajan group in BUKKAPATNAM. So a lot of time Swami would spend, in fact, even in the classes, Swami would sit and write some of these songs and bhajans and make copies of them, because he has to distribute it among the students. So many times during this BUKKAPATNAM days, Swami would go into some of these shrines. This is another temple, Hanuman temple in BUKKAPATNAM. These were two temples which were popular for these reveries of Swami, where he spent school days in. And needless to say, that explains that a lot of attendance was lost during Swami's BUKKAPATNAM days.
In fact, when the time of the ESLC exam came, for the main examination, Swami was not allowed because of insufficient attendance. So in the summer of that year, Swami actually did not give the ESLC examination, and that proved to be very fatal for the school, because the 40 children who gave the examination, 40 out of 40 failed. That is a story which we will come to later. Though Swami was not there at the school, when the school needed him, he was always there. And one such event when the school desperately needed Swami was during the annual day celebrations. Now, in the Rayalaseema region, there was one very, very, very famous dancer called Rishendra Mani. Probably this is the same Rishendra Mani. If you Google in Wikipedia, you will come across a dancer who went on to become an actress, a very famous actress. In fact, she later came to be known as Rayalaseema Rani, and she has acted in several movies after that. But she was an excellent dancer to begin with. And apparently, the chief item in her dance would be when she would dance with a lamp on her head. And as she is dancing, she would bend down and pick up a handkerchief which is on the floor between her teeth. And our Swami had a very graceful body. He had a very supple, thin body, and he loved to dance. In fact, Swami loved all the cultural arts. dancing, dramatic, singing, poetry. And we can see how much he has supported, motivated, and so many students have picked up so many of these art forms. He's revived art forms like Burrakatha, which none of us would have heard if not for Swami. So Swami would love dancing and he began to dance. And in fact, it is said, Swami's classmates would say that what Satyam did was fantastic. He went one step ahead of Rishendra Mani. She would put a lamp on her head and pick up a handkerchief with her teeth. Swami, in between his dance with a lamp on his head, would pick up a needle with his eyelashes. That was what Swami did. It's amazing. And unfortunately, no Radio SAI Global Harmony those days to do live coverage of that. It would have been a phenomenal video. Anyway, there was this annual day function for which it was rumored that a very, very famous dancer is coming. Sometimes, you should not keep secret because it will get hyped even more than what you can imagine. So everybody was convinced that Rishendra Mani is coming, but Rishendra Mani was not there. Now what did Swami do? Swami said, I will dance as Rishendra Mani. He put on the sari, he put on the dress. And this was not an ordinary function. It was being held at Kotta Cheruvu. I mean, in those days, it was equivalent to being held at the Indian capital, New Delhi, like that. Because Kotta Cheruvu is huge. A hall had been rented there. And it was being attended by the district collector, a British officer, because this was British India. And also present was Ram Subbamma. She was the president of the district education board. So it was a very, very important gathering. And that is where Swami as Rishendra Mani performed a dance which the people clapped and applauded. It was so phenomenal. And Swami danced and saved the day for the school because this was something that had got hyped beyond measure. And when everyone thought it would be a letdown, it appeared as though Rishendra Mani herself has come and performed a dance.